Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Awake and Thriving podcast. Today, we have with us again Amy White. She's a nutritionist and health and wellness coach, creator of Hangry to Healthy Nutrition Weight Loss Program. Welcome, Amy.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you back. I know last time our episode was rather long because we had a ton of stuff to talk about. So I wanted just to begin kind of where we left off. And where I really wanted to dive in initially was about prediabetes and your diet.
Yeah, yes. I was actually just I follow a prediabetes group on Facebook. I think that's where I was. And it was so interesting because somebody asked the question. They said, if diabetes or prediabetes runs in your family, does that mean there's really nothing you can do? You will just end up eventually with diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And I thought, kind of broke my heart, but I jumped right in and I said, no, I said, absolutely not. Because prediabetes, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes, is a disease of lifestyle. It's a lifestyle disease, which means that what you're doing is causing these symptoms and this condition. So doing meaning how you live and how you eat. So live, that would be sleep, that would be stress, that would be exercise, but your basic lifestyle. And then, of course, what you eat. So it really comes down to understanding. So prediabetes is a big red flag. Your body is saying you're metabolically unfit. You're out of balance. There's something wrong. So I actually, this is so bad. I get excited when somebody says, but I'm pre-diabetic, because I'm like, oh, that's your red flag. That's perfect. This is what you needed. And you're pre-diabetic. So you're in this wonderful place and you're in this position to actually reclaim your health, which you can do from type 2 diabetes, but it's harder, right? So if all of a sudden you have pre-diabetes and you're going to go in and make the changes. So I've taken pre-diabetes in 3 months. You can go from having those pre-diabetic lab markers. In 3 months, you can have optimal lab markers. You can completely switch your labs. And that's oftentimes I'll get people who are pre-diabetic, and they get people, meaning clients, and they're just like, my doctor wants to put me on metformin or some other medication for pre-diabetes. And they're like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, you don't have to, because we'll just fix it. And then they won't have a reason to want to put you on metformin. And I said fix it in quotes, air quotes there. But so we basically adjust their diet. Really, we just focus on diet for those 3 months. I don't even say get out there, start exercising, join a gym, get a trainer. Really just start with diet. And in 3 months, lab markers back to optimal. They're not good. They're not better. They're great. Yeah. So it's very, very doable.
And so do you find because I have a friend whose husband was just diagnosed with that.
Mm-hmm. Red flag.
Yeah, big red flag. But what I found is the whole family eats poorly and they
Right.
eat well, but they all have the same not great habits. And recently I saw her posting about dinner and she served a huge thing of mac and cheese, homemade, and huge things of mashed potatoes, and then fish. And I'm like, a part of me was like frustrated because I was like, that's not what he should be eating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but how do you approach that? Because that would be the whole family. Because most of the time, it's especially when it's a whole family approach to changing those kind
It
of things.
is, and it's such a gift for the kids to get them started on this early. It's like I get so excited when I just work with one person and they're part of a family, because I know that it will trickle over into the family. But it's such a timely question because I just started with a new client, a man. He's 32. And I just started with him 2 days ago. Same. He's like, I have been working on my diet so hard. He goes, I eat really well. And he goes, I just can't lose the weight. He goes, I just can't, it's just not, nothing's working, but I'm doing everything right. So I had him explain to me what's everything right? What's that mean? And really, you know what? He was to be congratulated. I said, first of all, pat yourself on the back. He does not go to McDonald's. He does not drink alcohol. He does not eat fast food. He eats healthy food, air quotes again, because he's eating what he's been told is healthy. So applesauce, yogurt, oatmeal, bananas, apples, rice and beans. I'm trying to think what else. Spaghetti, but all homemade. He's not buying this at the store. He's not getting packaged foods. So that's step one. Like your family, you said they eat well. She made homemade macaroni and cheese. So delicious. The problem is if you're pre-diabetic, your body's out of balance. You're not utilizing the energy that's coming into your body properly. So you have an energy overload and you're headed toward energy toxicity, which would be type 2 diabetes. So unfortunately, even though they're eating healthy food because it is homemade, it's still food high in sugar. And so this is so funny because I said that to him and he goes, I don't eat sugar. And I'm like, okay. He's like, I don't even like desserts. He goes, I don't eat any of that. And I'm like, right. But let's back up. Oatmeal, bananas, rice and beans, flavored yogurts, applesauce. I'm trying to think what else. Sushi. He loves sushi. So interesting. I said, to you, you're eating healthy whole grains. You're eating oatmeal. To your body, you have to kind of just make this switch in your head and you have to say, oh my God, my body just looks at that bowl of oatmeal and is like, yes, bowl of white sugar. That's what I'm getting because it converts so quickly in your body to sugar. So it's not the obvious sugars that we're worrying about, ice cream, Snickers bars, Oreos. It's the sneaky sugars. It's the stuff that you think is healthy, but because of your imbalance of energy use and storage, these foods aren't healthy for you. So to tell somebody they shouldn't be eating bananas, often they freak out. They're like, it's a banana, it's super healthy. Not for you. And that's where I think people have to get to. It's like, what works for them? So one of my phrases is always eat for the health and body you want. And that's going to be a little different for everybody. And it will change as your body shifts. So as your friend gets his prediabetes under control, all of a sudden, maybe going out for sushi is a great idea. Every now and then having apples, maybe that's a great thing to add back into your diet. Blueberries, great, but the occasional piece of sourdough bread, whatever. But again, you'll also learn what your body tolerates because you'll actually, if you do it right, you'll understand what works for your body and what doesn't work for your body. And you'll know that by how you feel. And a lot of other, there's a lot of different metrics that I have people follow so they can see what's happening and what's good and what's bad. Metrics beyond the scale, because the scale just does not tell the whole story. In fact, it can be very misleading. So I hate the scale. But once you sort of understand what works for your body, I always say, ideally, I fear no food. When you understand what works for your body and what doesn't, then there is no fear of food. It doesn't matter if somebody puts a basket of bread on the table. You're not afraid of the bread. You're like, you know what? If I eat that, I'm going to feel like this. And then tomorrow I'm going to feel like this. And today, that's not worth it to me. I'm not going to have the bread. But maybe another day you're like, yeah, I'm going to have a piece of bread. But you're not afraid of the bread. You're making an educated choice based on what you know about your body. And that's down the road. That's where I get people to. But yes, you are absolutely right. They're eating well. They're just not eating right for what's going on. And it's likely that his kids need to kind of get into that same mode that he's going to get into because they genetically, tend to probably be predisposed to going in that direction.
Yeah. And I noticed that for me, I had a grandfather and my mom was diabetic, but I knew that that was a lifestyle disease from a young
Yeah.
age. So I knew that, but my father's like a stallion. Like he's extremely healthy. He's in his 70s. Like he's a health nut. And I knew if I
Right.
modeled him,
Yes.
that I could avert having those lifestyle diseases, which I have done because I've seen people my age, which people that we're talking about right now are my age, and they have prediabetes. Some of them
Yeah.
have diabetes already. And for me, I feel like we're just way too young to be doing this right now.
So here's a fun at-home test. So insulin resistance. So insulin, when you talk diabetes, insulin. So type 1 diabetes need exogenous, they need to add insulin to their bodies to stay alive. It's important. Insulin is important. It's something that it's a hormone that we need. We run into trouble when insulin gets out of balance, and then we have chronically high levels of insulin. So then your body's playing that you're crying wolf game. So insulin's telling it to do something, because that's what insulin is. It's a hormone, so it's a regulating hormone. It gives instruction to the body. But your body, when you have too much insulin chronically, so all the time, your body's like, I'm done listening to you. You've said that story a million times and we're over it. Just shut up already. So what ends up happening is then you need more and more insulin to get the job done, because the body's really trying not to listen. So this is when we have this chronically high insulin. So insulin resistance is something that it's really kind of important to recognize that's happening to your body, because that's when you're going to go to the doctor and he's going to go, you're pre-diabetic, and you'll be like, what are you talking about? I'm fine. So one of the things you can do is you take a piece of string and you wrap it around your body twice, and then you take it off and unroll it and hold it up. And if it's taller than you are, if the string is longer than you are tall, you're likely insulin resistant or headed that way. So that's this idea of waist to height ratio. And so another way to do it is to take your height, you take your weight in inches and divide it by your height in inches. And you want 0.5 or less is what you're looking for from that equation.
So you divide
Take your
weight.
waist in inches.
Oh, your waist in inches.
So let's say my waist is 27 inches and my height is 57 inches. And so I think I calculate out to like a 0.48 or something like that. So you want to be 0.5 or less is what you're looking for.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, isn't that fun? But if you don't want to do the math, you can use the string and do it that way. Now, the thing to understand, and this is where it gets a little tricky, is you do not have to look overweight. You do not have to be overweight. You could be a marathon runner and you could still end up with type 2 diabetes. And that gets into this whole other thing about your personal fat threshold. So your body's ability to make baby fat cells and get fatter and bigger. Some people can put on a lot of fat cells and be very, very overweight, and their labs will look fine. Other people can look very, very thin and be type 2 diabetic. I have a friend. I think we must have talked about this in the last one because it's seeming very familiar to me. But I have a friend who's tiny, and she is a type 2 diabetic recently. But she's also a proclaimed sugar addict. And she still is eating lots of candy. She loves candy. She's in her 60s and she loves candy. So it kind of caught up with her.
Definitely. And so explain this diabetes with so there's people that can make a lot of fat cells, but they won't necessarily be diabetic. And then there's
right.
right?
So when you can make a lot of fat cells, you avoid this concept of energy toxicity. So one of the things that's so important when people are on a health and weight loss journey, or even just a health journey, you have to realize that you heal from the inside out. So there have been some studies on, so subcutaneous fat is that fat that we carry around under our skin that we can pinch. Then we have ectopic fat. No, then we have the visceral fat. The visceral fat is then in your abdomen and it's in and around your organs. I said in and around. Let's say it's around your organs. And then I think it's the ectopic fat. I might be getting my phrases confused, is in the organs. So that's when you have fatty liver, fatty pancreas. So anyways, it's step one step one is that subcutaneous fat. That's healthy fat. That's normal fat. Keeps us warm. Then we have that intra-abdominal fat that's around our organs, but it shouldn't be there. You shouldn't be carrying fat in there. And then the next level, when that's full, is in the organs. So that fatty liver and that fatty pancreas. And the problem is when you're healing, you're going to clean that liver out first. You're going to clean the organs out first. Then you're going to clean out that fat that's in and around the organs. And then you'll get to working on that subcutaneous fat. Okay. So personal fat threshold means you have the ability to continue to grow baby fat cells. So you don't actually put on fat in your organs or around your organs. You just carry it externally in this sort of healthy way. It may not look good. It's also not maybe great for your body because it's hard on your joints. You know, it's a lot of weight to carry for your cardiovascular system. So there's other things going on, but your labs metabolically can still look good. Now, if you're somebody who can't add a lot of fat, and there's different cultures that just tend to be tiny people, tiny and slim people, they don't put on a lot of new baby fat cells. So just 10 extra pounds on that kind of a frame can make them pre-diabetic because they have 10 extra pounds that maybe they can see, but they have a lot more that's going on inside. So in their organs, around their organs. And that's when you really run into trouble. That's the dangerous fat. And so it's hard sometimes when I'm working with clients because the scale, they're just not seeing stuff happen on the scale and they get very frustrated and it's not working. And I'm like, you're healing from the inside out. We want to, clean up the fatty liver. We want to get that fat out from, in your abdominal cavity. So we're working this way, which is why I always tell people, please take measurements, because as that fat clears out, you will see body shape changes. That's where the inches come off. And the scale eventually catches up. But it's really important to see how your clothes are fitting and make sure you're checking your inches, all of that. Mobility, are you moving better? Are your joints feeling, that's one of the things that happens to go away usually first is like any kind of achy and sore joints. So that's yes. So anyway, it's important to know that typically people are going to be carrying extra weight around their middle, and that's a good sign that there's, their metabolic hormones are out of balance and their insulin is running amok, so to speak.
I've noticed myself, like just with increasing or what I'm doing right now with my new changes to my habits because of the holidays, that I've been just looking at how my body's been changing in the mirror. My composition has been changing.
Mm-hmm.
And even though for me, it's different because everyone has a different journey and what works for them. But for me, I'm increasing a lot of things because I was in a deficit because that's what I do when I'm stressed.
Yes.
And that was not good for me. And I noticed when I was in a deficit, I was always like, I don't think I was eating well, but I was always like bloated, or I just wouldn't wake up well. And I was never hungry. And now my stomach I always wake up how it's always been when I'm in a healthy mind and body, which is it's flat. It's almost concave in the morning. And I'm hungry and I'm like, okay, so I'm doing something right. I know this is working for me. And my workouts, I'm actually able to increase my workouts, my endurance, the weights I lift. And it's all because of what I'm putting into my body, because I'm paying more attention to how my body's reacting to certain foods. So.
Yes, exactly.
But I
So
haven't weighed
you have
myself
developed
either.
your own metrics.
Yeah. And I haven't weighed myself either, Amy, like at all.
But you don't need to, because you do have all these metrics. Oh, I can lift more weights. Oh, I feel better. Oh, in the morning, I feel like this. So you've established certain metrics that you know to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I'm continuing to watch. And that's what's actually motivating me even more. Because I know for a lot of people in general, stepping on the scale every day, once a week, it's not encouraging sometimes. Sometimes it's really discouraging.
Absolutely. And I have people that I ask to please don't use the scale. I mean, it's too much for them at first, and usually they can grow into it because it is a data point. But here's another quick takeaway. So there's an app and it's called Happy Scale. And I heard about it. I don't know where I heard about it, but I was like, Happy Scale. And I downloaded the app. And it is, psychologists must have made this app. So what happens is it connects to my Apple Health on my phone. So if I weigh myself, my scale also connects. So it grabs the data, but you can input your data. So you can weigh yourself and then input your data. But what you do is it asks you, do you have a weight loss goal? And you're like, well, yeah, I want to lose 10 pounds, let's say. And so you're 200 pounds, you want to weigh 190 pounds. So it's like, great. And it says your goal is 190 pounds. And so when you look at the app, the central circle is a milestone that it sets for you. So you may weigh in at 200 pounds, but what you're going to see right here is 198.6, because that's your next milestone goal. And psychologically, it's hilarious because I'm like, no, I know I weighed more than that when I got on the scale. Oh, 198.6, that's nice. It's the weirdest thing ever. And then sure enough, you keep weighing yourself. So it creates this little bar called milestones or goals. And it just walks you to each one of these little bubbles. And it says, well, you're going to hit your goal in this many days on this date based on how much weight how your weight fluctuates from day to day or whatever. And it just sets these goals. You don't set them. And then it just keeps lighting up the bubbles as you hit, and it changes the number in this main circle. And it's just like, it's the weirdest thing because and intellectually what you weighed in at is up at the top, across the top, but it doesn't matter. You're like, oh, 98.6. It's such a weird thing. And I have other clients using it and they've said the exact same thing. They're like, it's the greatest. So I don't know what it is, but it's worth checking out.
Yeah, that sounds really cool to check out the Happy Scale, because anyone that
it's just look up the app, Happy Scale. I wish I dreamt it up, but there are far more clever people than me out there.
Okay, I'm going to look at that. So moving along, I know we talked about this before. It happens to a lot of people. They're successful in all aspects of life, but their body. They can't get their body where they want it, where they think it should be. And this is another random thing. Do you think that some people are predispositioned to be a certain size? Like this is their happy weight because they've been like that their whole life. And some of them are a lot larger than most of the population, but that's how they've been for most of their life. And some people are just thin and they've been that most part of their life. Like I feel like there might be some genetics involved in that. What do you think about that?
Well, I know from my personal experience, my kids, and I think they get this from my husband, are dense, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So they actually weigh a lot. But to look at them, like my son is 6'2" and he's thin, but I think he weighs probably 220 pounds. But if you look at him, you would think he probably weighed 160 pounds. Like you'd think he could put on some weight. But in my daughter, same, she's little, she's 5'3", and she typically weighs around 160 pounds, but people think she weighs 120 pounds, like visually. And my husband's the same way. He got on the scale at the doctor's and he weighed 200 pounds and the doctor's like, I just don't see it. So there is that going on. I don't know what that is. I think they actually have a lot of muscle mass. So there's that's kind of the thing going on. But I think what you were saying is more visually, they actually look like bigger people. I don't know. Certainly your body does like to settle. So there are points where your body likes to hang out and it's sort of its happy place. That doesn't mean it's the ideal optimal weight for you. There's certainly a big range of what is ideal weight when you look at a chart for your age and height. There is definitely a range in there, but it depends on what feels good to you. So if you're trying to diet, if you're somebody that weighs 150 pounds and you're trying to diet down to 120 pounds, can you get there? You can. There's lots of different roads to the same destination. So you certainly can get there, but can you stay there comfortably? Likely not. So I guess where's that happy medium that you feel really good? You feel like you look really good and your body's like, I'm happy to sit here. This works for me. I don't know, so I feel like,
different weights for different sizes and different people.
yeah,
Yeah. I looked
yeah,
at
I
something.
think so too. But and one of the things that the main concept of what I teach in the Hangry to Healthy program is this idea of consistency. And even if people are having a sort of slow start, one of my questions is always, if you continue to do what you're doing, and eat the way you're eating and recognize that it's working for your body, if you do this for the next 6 months, do you anticipate that you will be in a better place in 6 months or a worse place or the same place? And they always say, I think I'm going to be in a better place. And I have to agree, because it's this idea of creating this trajectory. So you've set up the dominoes to go to a certain place, and now you're just going to let it happen. So it's this concept of time all of a sudden becomes your ally. And you just have to trust that you actually are doing the right things and your dominoes are set up in the proper way to go to that place you want to go to. And I feel like what I kind of coach them through and teach them, I, I just don't see that ever resulting in something negative or worse. I don't see their bodies shifting in a bad way. So I don't know. So for somebody who's sort of been at a steady weight for a very, very long time, if they make some diet, if there's room to make some healthy diet adjustments, because maybe there aren't, maybe they are doing everything just right. But let's say there's some room to make some adjustments. Is it possible that that body will shift and shrink in some way? Maybe release some fat, increase lean muscle, just change composition. I think yes, I do. I think it can. I think it happens.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I know people on both sides. I know people that are almost, they're extremely thin. And these are males that I know that are like really, really, really thin, like probably are 150 and
Yeah.
6'1" or 6'.
Yeah. And
And
are they lifting weights?
no, that person isn't. But trying to get them to increase their meals.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what they're eating, but I feel like it's just not enough
Yeah.
because they're just so severely, and they're not happy with it either. Like, I'm not saying like they're
Yeah. They
actually,
want to increase. Yeah.
they want to increase it, but it's just difficult for them to do that. So,
Yeah. I would definitely get on. If that was a client of mine, we would be looking at total amount of protein in grams in a day. And then we would be looking at increasing muscle size. And you can only increase muscle size by putting that muscle under stress. So weightlifting. Um, but first, maybe get the diet so that they're understanding how much to eat. And then if they have more energy and are feeling,
up to it.
better, then all of a sudden the exercise seems kind of like more fun than work.
Yeah.
So it's always sort of that second tier for me.
Hmm.
But yeah, for sure.
So I
Girls
know I
too,
asked you two
women
questions.
too.
I know I asked you two questions at once, but so the really successful people that are having trouble mastering
Yes.
their body, I feel like there's
Yeah.
a lot of the population.
It is. And it's so, those are the people I tend to work with. Those are the people that find me and they are so frustrated, but they also are very type A and they're very much making sure all the balls stay in the air. And often when that's the case, something's got to give. And so what they have decided, or prior to this point in their life, they are the thing that they gave. They're like, I'm just gonna, it's okay, I'll get to that. But then they get to a point where they're actually now ready to get to that. They're tired of going, I'll do this later, because they just don't feel good anymore. And that will in fact impact everything else that they're successful at eventually. But yeah, it's unfortunately, it is a point where they have to commit and decide, I'm going to take some of my attention and I'm going to move it over here. So that you have to make the effort to have that happen. But yeah, that is like the one thing that is so frustrating to them, because they're like, I get it. I can do anything. I'm amazing at everything. Let's say I just can't get this. And so first there's the attention piece. You have to get there. And then second, I think there's so much information out there, and these are people who are educated and they're good at finding information. They're good at solving problems. So if you don't find, if you're looking at sort of outdated information, and this was what happened to me. So I was 37 and I was just puffy and uncomfortable and achy and everything. My skin, it was just, my clothes didn't fit. And I had been always very trim, athletic. And all of a sudden I was at my niece's third birthday party eating cupcakes. And I'm like, what? I don't even want this cupcake. And it's like my fourth one and I'm going to eat it anyway. It's yummy. But I feel horrible. I feel the growth, blah, blah, blah. So I was at that moment, I was like, I'm going to be turning 40 soon. And I've heard that when you turn 40, you are what you are, and then it just gets worse. And I was freaking out. I'm like, I won't do that. I want to be my old self. I just don't feel like me. So I did for 2 years. I was like, I'm buckling down. I'm going to follow the food guidelines because that's what they tell you to do. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of people who are confused about what's healthy, right? That my client we were talking about earlier, how he was eating well. He made all his own food, but it wasn't right for his body and what his body was doing. So you find these successful people who are now coming to sort of midlife and they're like, you know what? I have it all, but I want this one last thing. So I again, not my phrase. I heard this from somewhere else and I don't even remember where, but it was called metabolic debt. And so you've had this metabolic debt building up over the years because you haven't been taking care of your body, and your body's been doing everything it can to make sure that you're sleeping and that your weight's staying the same and you have the energy for the day. And it finally, at this midlife point, it's like, I can't do it anymore. I'm so sorry. And then everything starts falling apart. And so you have to pay back this debt. And so this is when you have to figure out, well, how do I eat for the health in the body that I want? And what I discovered was the food guidelines were not how I did that. And I was at a point in my life where I knew nothing, and my daughter had gut issues. And so anyway, that ended up sending me to a nutrition school. So that's when I got my master's degree in nutrition. And while we healed her, I also figured out how to fix me, because I all of a sudden understood food and food as information. So I always say it's a communication problem. So you think you're telling your body one thing when in fact you're really telling your body something else. And so all of a sudden, once you understand food as information and you know how to then use that to tell your body the real story, everything changes. And so what I find with these professionals and these successful people is they don't have the right information. They're not feeding their body the right story. So there's a communication problem. And then once you sort of explain what that means and how to use food, there's a learning curve. But once they get it, it works. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, now I know how to tell my body what I want. And now your body works with you instead of against you. So this fight that you always feel like you're having is gone. It's like, oh, okay. Again, the dominoes have been set up, and you're just letting them fall.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like that's something that I know someone close to me is going through right now. So I'm going to try to help him with that part. And this kind of ties into, I'm not sure how you want to talk about it, but the protein and energy versus the intermittent fasting, like which one do you want to?
Yeah. So, let's start with intermittent fasting.
Okay.
So the way I kind of process through all of this with people, so teaching people how to eat for the body they want, first thing we have to do is we have to break up with sugar. We have to let it go. And it's so liberating and empowering when you finally are like, sugar doesn't control me anymore. So we break up with the sugar. And then once you break up with the sugar, all of a sudden what you find is the food that you're eating is healthy, it's nutrient dense, and it's giving your body everything it needs. So all of a sudden your body starts it stops asking you to feed it constantly because it's good. It's like, I'm good. I'll talk to you in 5 hours. And so slowly but surely, you actually start intermittent fasting naturally, which is my favorite way to do it. So I never ask people to force a fast. I want them to get to a point where they're telling me that they're not hungry, that they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm just not hungry. I love that conversation. I'm like, just ride it out because your appetite will regulate. But right now, just it's okay. They're like, but I didn't even eat anything until like 2 this afternoon. And I'm like, I love that. That's what I want to hear. You didn't eat till 2 in the afternoon because you weren't hungry. And they're like, right. I'm like, first rule number 1, never eat if you're not hungry. So if you're not hungry till 2 in the afternoon, then you eat at 2 in the afternoon. And then depending what you ate at 2 in the afternoon, like if I'm super busy in the morning and I can't eat until like say 1, but I knew I was going to have a steak for lunch because I've been looking forward to it, and some salad, I probably am done for the day. Like I won't be hungry enough to have dinner, mostly because I eat giant steaks. They're not little, they're giant. So that will keep me for like till the next morning. But so you really have to start to understand what it feels like to feel hungry again. So many people don't understand their hunger cues. So that's like, so as we're coming off of sugar, we're starting to get back in touch with, I'm hungry because I need actual nutrients, or I'm hungry because I need energy, or I'm hungry because I have a hedonistic hunger, which means I'm hungry for something, but it's not food. But of course, I'm going to fill that hunger hole with food. So that's bad. So you need to understand the difference between those hungers. So as we get rid of the sugars, that hedonistic hunger starts to calm down. So we don't have this, these constant sugar cravings and this roller coaster of energy anymore. It's more balanced. And now we're getting these nutrients. So we're getting that nutrient hunger satisfied. And then that causes you to not eat. So like what I say to people is I want you to get to a point where you have a meal and then you can go 4 to 5 hours without needing to eat again, without feeling like you're, thinking about food. So the thing is, so that's when we get into sort of that energy hunger or that fuel, sort of that nutrient hunger. So if you have a lot of body fat, you have plenty of energy. So you don't have an energy hunger, but in 4 to 5 hours, your body likely will ask you to feed it again because it needs nutrients again. So once you get lean and thin and you get to that sort of ideal body weight, you're going to probably have to balance that nutrient and energy hunger. So sometimes you have to increase your fats when you're actually at your maintenance weight, so you feel satisfied.
And when you would increase your fats, you would adjust like all of your protein as well with it, or?
Okay, so protein to energy. Thank you. We'll go in there. So you want to look up Dr. Ted Naiman. I love him. I love his protein to energy ideas. So he's all about increasing. So he's got a graph. He's got tons of infographics. And you can, I think if you Google pdediet.com, you'll find him. So his graphs are like this. And this bottom half is energy and this top half is nutrients. And on this graph, you basically want to be here or somewhere up here. Anywhere from the middle on up to that second half of the graph is going to be a fat burning. So a middle will be closer to sort of a maintenance level of protein to energy. And then above that, you're going to be in a fat burning. So you're going to be increasing lean mass. Anything below the 1, but actually kind of pretty far below the 1 on the ratio is fat gaining. So one of the things I see happen in a low carb or especially ketogenic community is people dive in and they're all about the fat. They're like, oh no, I have to eat fat. I have to eat fat. That's the diet I'm on. I have to eat all this fat. And then they don't understand why they're not actually succeeding. I've had people, I'm working with a woman now who's done keto diet 3 times and failed, but now she's not. Now it's working because I said, you can't just eat cream, avocados, nuts, cheese, that's all way down here on that energy to protein scale. So it's too much energy. This is fat gain zone. So what you want to do is you want to, at the very least, you want to have a 1-to-1 ratio of fat to protein. So if an easy, if you're looking at something that you're buying at the store, let's say it's a protein bar or something like that, at the very least, you want the fats and the proteins to be the same. 20 grams of fat, 20 grams of protein. That's going to give you a 1 on that ratio for the most part. Carbs and fibers will play in. So if it's 20 grams of fat and 20 grams of protein and 20 grams of carbs, that'll push you down to the energy end of that ratio. So you want the carbs low. But ideally, you want something that's going to have less fat and more protein. So as people move through my program, we get to this concept. We work with P to E ratio, but it's like kind of the last thing we do because I think of it as a very advanced concept. I want people to be very tuned into their hunger cues. So I want them to feel what it's like to feel hungry. I want them to have a gurgling stomach. I want the rumbles. I want them to kind of start feeling a little like, I can't stop thinking about food. That's another sign that you're probably hungry. And then there's another thing we do in my program where we can test certain things to see if you do need fuel. But anyway, so hunger cues, and then you eat when you're hungry. And then ideally you're going to stop when you're full. And then you're hopefully not going to eat again for 4 to 5 hours because you got all the nutrients you needed. I say, if you're hungry again in 2 hours, I need you to look back at what you ate. It wasn't enough. So if you had 3 eggs and some bacon and avocado, likely you're going to need 4 eggs and maybe another piece of bacon, so to kind of get what your body needs to run for those 4 or 5 hours. So what I do when I get sort of to that end, so I give everybody recipes. I mean, I have zillions of recipes. So I don't want anyone to have to think about, well, what am I supposed to make? What am I supposed to eat? And like, if you make any of these recipes, don't think about it, just enjoy. And toward the end, I do more protein to energy ratio recipes. So you'll look in there and you'll see, oh, this recipe has 19 grams of fat per serving. Oh, but 47 grams of protein and the carbs are 3, so that kind of a thing. So it's already built in. So then I'm like, okay, so then let's try to up those proteins a little bit and see how you feel. And again, depending on where someone is in their journey, if they still have a lot of weight to lose, one of the things you have to remember, especially for those keto, low carb people, if you are carrying a lot of body fat, you are high fat. Your diet is high fat. So even if you're not eating that fat off of your plate, your body is eating high fat. And that's what you want. You want it to be eating that body fat. So the more you give it on your plate, the less it's going to have to dig in and use the fat that you're carrying around. So you want to give it enough on your plate so things are tasty and you're satisfied, but not so much that it doesn't need to then dig deep. Not so much that it's like, oh, we can't even use all this. I'm actually going to have to put some of it in storage. And that's where people run into trouble. People on a ketogenic diet can gain weight because they're eating too much fat and their body's just having to store it. If you're carrying a lot of body fat, you're always high fat. And you have to realize that you don't need fat bombs. You don't need butter coffees, and you don't need to be drowning your vegetables in olive oil and butter, because your food, I want you to prioritize the protein, and the protein has fat in it.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that's what you want. You want to eat those healthy fatty proteins. So on this graph, energy to protein, up here at the very high end of the scale is our non-fat proteins. So white fish, egg whites, whey protein. And we were talking about that before we started, saying this isn't a fun place to live. It's not that tasty and it's not very fun. And you can feel pretty hungry even. So you kind of want to live more down here, kind of middle, a little above middle, where the bacon and the ribeye and the whole eggs and the chicken thighs and that kind of stuff live, and the salmon, the tasty fatty proteins. You don't need to add a lot of fat. You're getting a ton of fat in your food. You do want to use enough olive oil and enough butter to make your vegetables taste delicious and your salads, and, add a little, sure, add some cheese. It doesn't mean you can't eat cheese. You just don't want it to be sort of this foundational piece of your diet.
Yes. And I think that that was actually really key for me. And we spoke about it before, was I'm really good at what I'm doing right now, hitting my protein, even though it's a lot, and hitting my carbs, but my fats, I was just always going over on fats, no matter what I was doing. And after our last talk, when you're like, your protein more than likely already has fat in it. So you don't need to add all this fat into your diet, because if you're eating enough protein, you have fat that's going in. And just that alone helped me. I'm still going over on fat, but not as much
Right.
as I was before.
But look at you, you're pretty lean. So you actually could get to a point where your body's going to ask you for fat
Yeah.
because you're lean enough that you might need that. My sister's very lean and she actually has to eat a lot of fat actually to stay satisfied and comfortable. And I can get to a point as well where I will notice if I'm not getting enough fat, because all of a sudden I'll just be like, we need bacon. I need to make bacon. And I'm like, wait a second. We haven't had bacon in months, but now we must make bacon. And I'm like, oh, I bet I'm not getting enough fat. And that would often be the case. And so my body will be like, how about some cheese? We should have a slice of cheese, and I'm like, oh, wait a second. So when I start hunting for cheese, bacon, and nuts, I usually am like, oh, I probably need a little more fat. And that's when I'm like, I should have a ribeye for lunch.
Okay. I'll pay attention to that too, because I know previously I had tried to cut my fats, because it's always been a thing for me. I've always gone over on fats,
Mhm.
but there was, I think I talked to you about this before. When I cut my fats before, I was majority like chicken and fish. And then when I met my boyfriend, he's more like ribeyes and that sort of stuff. But I noticed once I integrated more fats in my diet, what I'm seeing now, because of his meat intake was different than mine. There's
Mhm.
certain things that were happening for me, like I would get dandruff. There's certain like skin things that actually it changed for the better once
Yeah.
I had more fat in my diet.
Yeah.
So I do have to watch that for a lot of different reasons. But I noticed that too, not enough fat affects me, and too much. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
And that's why they're levers, and that's why they're always going to be slightly different for everybody.
yeah.
Some people are going to need a little more fat, some people are going to need less, to feel comfortable and satisfied. Because it's a lifestyle, so you're not dieting. So you need to find that sort of place where you're like humming along and everything's good. Your sleep is good, your energy's good, your sugar cravings are under control, your appetite is balanced. So you've got that basically that feasting to fasting ratio balanced. So you're getting enough overnight fasting. So ideally you want a minimum of 12 hours of feasting, 12 hours of fasting. But if you want to push it, that's when you go to a 14-hour fast or a 16-hour fast. So that would be the intermittent fasting. Ideally, it happens naturally. You wake up and you're not hungry, so you don't eat till 10 or 11. And by that point, you're like, well, gosh, I stopped dinner. I didn't have dinner until 6. I was done at 6:30 last night. So now I'm at 16 hours. It sort of happens like that. But I also tell people, if you wake up hungry, you should eat. So it's sort of this intuitive fasting. Just let your body kind of follow your cues. Most of the time, you're likely going to wake up and not be hungry. So great, don't eat. But if one day you wake up and you're like, I'm so hungry, then you should eat.
Yeah.
And typically on days that I do that, if I start eating early, because I usually don't eat till 11 at the earliest. But if I start eating at 8:30, I'm probably going to be done eating by 3 in the afternoon. So then so my fast, it shifts and then it just gets longer in the evening. I start my overnight fast earlier. I actually prefer that. If I could finish eating at 4 o'clock every day, that would be ideal for me.
Mhm. I would
'Cause-
probably like to finish eating by like 5,
Yeah.
but
I go to
my
bed
partner
early.
doesn't like to
Yeah.
eat that early at all.
I know. It's my 3-year-old grandson who doesn't want to eat till 6:30. I'm like, "Ugh, come on."
It's dinner time. Aw. Okay. So I feel like, let's see, is there anything that I didn't ask you that we were supposed to go over? Because there was so much stuff. I remember our last episode.
I know. I'm trying to think I'm sure as soon as we hang up, we'll think of, oh, we forgot to talk
Amy,
about
we've
that or
already,
this.
you know how long
Yeah.
we've been on the phone
Yeah.
on this call?
There's so much, and it's just such a fun, well, to me, it's such a fun topic
Yes.
because I just feel like it's like having an instruction manual. All of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a second. I see why stuff wasn't working. Oh, now it makes sense. And oh, okay. And it's just like, yeah. And you actually do see changes. And it's
And there are these just little tweaks like that
little
you
tweaks.
have. And once they're changed, you're like a light bulb. You're like, that's the missing piece
Yeah.
this whole time.
Yeah. It's those little, I always refer to them as nuggets. I love anytime I listen to a podcast or I read an article, if I can walk away even with just one new nugget, I'm like, success.
Yes.
But yeah, they're just these nuggets. And when you start putting them all together, and of course, I've been doing this for over 10 years. So I have lots of nuggets that I've been putting together, and I have my personal experience and client experience, and it's so interesting. But I would say that number one thing I think for people to try to understand is, where are the sneaky sugars? So if you don't feel like you eat a lot of sugar, and maybe you don't, but if you're carrying extra weight and you're suffering with sort of this energy roller coaster, so you feel up and then you crash, and then you have to eat, and then you feel up and then you crash, there's too much sugar in your diet. There's something going on. So you're basically a sugar burner. You've blocked your ability to use and access body fat. So when you are primarily burning sugar, your body is not burning body fat. And that's back to that whole idea of insulin resistance. When your insulin is high, chronically high, so you have insulin circulating through your body even when you're not eating, but particularly when you're eating, one of insulin's jobs is to make sure that you use the energy coming into your body. And in order to do that, it totally locks off the energy that you're carrying. So all that body fat gets locked away. Insulin's like, no, no, no. Everybody stay put. We have this to work with, but I might be, adding more over there to you guys. So hang on. We might be putting some in, but we're definitely not taking any out. And so that's why insulin is a very important metabolic hormone to get under control, because you want to be able to access that body fat. And ultimately, you want to get to a point where you're very metabolically flexible. So that means you can burn sugar, and then you can seamlessly jump over and start burning fat. So you never do this. So maybe you did have one day, there was more sugar in this meal. So you were kind of, oh, and then it sort of started to come back down, but it didn't freak out because, oh, it hit here. And it's like, oh, look, we have all this fat we can use instead. So it didn't like, crash and cause what's called reactive hypoglycemia, which is when you start feeling shaky and dizzy and a little nauseous and uncomfortable and very food focused. And I refer to that as hangry, but that doesn't happen. So when you're metabolically flexible, you don't get hangry because you have plenty of fuel. And you can use, so this is when you get to that place where all of a sudden you can add a banana back in. Oh, you can add a piece of sourdough bread, or with a piece of toast with your breakfast, or you can do that because your body can burn those sugars. It's like, oh, that's fine. I can take care of that. No problem. I'll burn that off, and then we'll go start using fat. So that's all of a sudden when you're metabolically healthy and balanced, you can eat kind of a much more diverse diet. Yeah, you can have some sweet potatoes. Yeah, no problem. Not a problem.
Well, Amy, you have enlightened me the last 2 episodes. All the info that you've given me, like you've given me some nuggets.
I'm so
So yeah, some really good, like brilliant nuggets. Like the biggest nugget for me personally will be the meat. Your protein has fat in it.
yeah.
Like it does have fat in it. So you don't have to add all this fat in if you already are eating a lot of protein. For me, that changes really a lot of the stuff that I'll be doing moving forward. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that was helpful. And just for everybody else, if you are trying to adjust those fats a little bit and kind of bring, maybe you're like, oh, I do want to bring my fats down just slightly. One easy trick, instead of having bacon, have like turkey sausage. Instead of having a hamburger, have a turkey burger. So there are leaner meats. So you can kind of play around with the fattier meats to the leaner meats. And, maybe one day of bacon and another day of turkey sausage. So you can kind of play that way too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being on the podcast again. I really, really appreciate it. Tons of great info. I can't wait to get this episode out as well.
It was my pleasure, really. I enjoyed it so much. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.